Welcome students, and I hope you have gone through the first part, and now we move on to the second part of the First World War and its aftermath. So here we are going to learn about imperialism and its essential characteristics. So first let me tell you what imperialism is. What is imperialism? When a country tries to extend its power by making colonies or by enforcing military force into another country, we call that attitude as imperialism. So here what are its characteristics? So what does it do is what we are going to learn here. So here capitalism led to imperialism. So why was there a need for imperialism? Because countries, they were in an urge, they were in a search to earn more and more money. So that means they were capitalist countries. So that made them to enforce their power over other countries. So capitalism was the main reason for imperialism to take place. So according to Lenin, so who is Lenin? He is actually a Russian revolutionist. So he said that imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism. So when capitalism keeps increasing, what is the final result that you will get? It is imperialism. So who said this? This was a statement given by Lenin. You have to remember this because this comes for a 1-mark question also. So colonies, they served two purposes. One was they served as markets, the other one they served as producers of raw materials. So what raw materials did these colonies produce? This is again another 1-mark question. So it's rubber. They produced rubber, oil, nitrates, sugar, cotton, tropical foodstuffs and minerals. So these are the raw materials that the colonies were producing. What are they? Let me repeat. It is rubber, oil, nitrates, sugar, cotton, tropical foodstuffs and minerals. Now all these raw materials were needed by, this was needed by the capitalist monopoly everywhere. So whichever country was in monopoly, monopoly means an individual, a single entity, all these entities, they needed raw materials. So imperialism was not only about colonies, it was also about war. So whenever they wanted to empower their country, to force their country, what they did is they waged war, they did military enforcement also. So now let us move on to your lesson and see how it reads through. So capitalism inevitably led to imperialism. That's what we studied. Capitalism gave way to imperialism. So according to Lenin, imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism. This is a very important 1-mark question. So who said this? Lenin was the person who said that imperialism was the highest stage of capitalism. Besides being a market for surplus goods, colonies served another purpose. So that means these colonies were not only markets for surplus, means when something is produced more than wanted, we call it surplus. So colonies were not only markets, but they served another purpose. What is that purpose? Large scale mass production needed vast supplies of raw materials. So whenever you want to produce in a large scale, you need lot of raw materials. So what are the raw materials you need? Rubber, oil, nitrates, sugar, cotton, tropical foodstuffs, mineral, etc. were raw materials. This was necessary for monopoly capitalists everywhere throughout the world. They needed this. So the need to control the sources of raw materials inevitably led to imperialism. So when they wanted to control that led to what? Imperialism. So imperialism was not just about colonies, it became a total system, the logic of which was total militarization and total war. So it was a total system where you have imperialism was done through war and military force. So the next topic for discussion here is rivalry of great powers. Rivalry means competition of great powers. Now we have already learned who are these great powers. Generally the European countries were great powers. So that's what we are going to learn here, how they were competing with each other to gain power was the thought here. So here if you see, in the beginning of the 19th century, European countries colonized many countries. So European countries generally, when you talk about, it is Russia, the UK, and maybe when you talk about Russia and the UK, you talk about France, England, all these countries are called as European countries. So these countries, they colonized many countries. But in 1880, Asian countries were also colonized. Asian country, you know, India belongs to the Asian country. So in 1880, what happened is Asian countries were getting colonized by the European countries. But Africa alone was left out. So nobody went to Africa to set up colonies. But from 1881 to 1914, the African countries were also colonized by the European countries. So during the later part of the 19th century, Germany had industrial achievements. It went through a varied industrial achievements, and it became very dominant. Dominant, it means it became very powerful because of its industrial achievements. But by this time, the whole world was chasing and exploiting other countries by imperialistic power. So the other countries were trying to exploit other countries by what power? By imperialistic powers. So they grabbed each other's possession. So each country was trying to grab the other country's possession. Possession means belongings. So after 1870, remember, there are countries which we are going to state right now: England, France, Belgium, Italy and Germany. They joined in the scramble for colonies. What is scramble? That means we already learnt in the last session. A quick way by which you can get colonies is called a scramble. So in 1870, these countries, they joined and they were fighting to get colonies. So this was the rivalry in the great powers. Okay. So let's go on to the book now. So in the 19th century, so it's in the beginning of the 19th century, we are talking about Europe. So European powers, they had colonized many countries. But what happened in 1880, most of the Asian countries had been colonized. Only Africa was left. The occupation, division and colonization of Africa took place in which year? From 1881 to 1914. This was Africa being colonized. The industrial achievements of Germany in the later half of the 19th century gave her a dominating position in Europe. So because of the industrial achievement, Germany became so dominant, it became the most powerful country. But when Germany came on the scene, the avenues means the way by which you get income, the avenues of exploitation were limited as the world was largely occupied by the other imperialistic powers. So Germany wanted to exploit other country, but already the imperialistic powers were exploiting other countries. As there was nowhere to expand, the imperialistic powers tried to grab others' possession. Possession means the others' belongings. After 1870, remember the year is also important, England, France, Belgium, Italy and Germany joined in the scramble for colonies. So these countries joined and they started for fighting for colonies. The next we go on to clashes among great powers. So here again, great powers, as we said, Europe was, some European countries were fighting for power. Now the first great power was England. So England had industrial growth. It had a vast empire, a big empire, but it was not at all satisfied. Which country? England. So it competed. So England started to fight or compete with Germany and United States, that's USA, because these two countries, which country? Germany and United States, they manufactured cheaper goods and captured whose market? England's market. So you must remember here, England started to compete. They were in competition with Germany and United States, because Germany and United States, they were producing cheaper goods and they captured England's markets. So what happened is, national rivalry means it's a clash, okay, led to frequent clashes or competence between the great powers in Asia and Africa and Europe. So these clashes took place in Asia as well as in Africa as well as in Europe. So let's go to the content here in your book. So despite the lead in industrial growth and the control of a vast empire, England was not satisfied. So England was not at all satisfied of its industrial growth and its vast empire. England was in competition with Germany and the United States, which were producing cheaper manufactured goods and thus capturing England's markets. National rivalry led to frequent means often, clashes between these great powers. Where they were fighting also in Asia, in Africa and in Europe. The rise of Japan. So here what's going to happen in Asia is what we are going to see here. In 1867 to 1912, which is called as the Meiji era, Japan imitated Western countries. Imitated Western countries means it's trying to follow Western countries. That means European countries. So it was following European countries' thoughts. So Japan took to, so what are the thoughts that it took? It took its Western education, it took up the missionary from there, it developed its modern army and also the navy, and when it did all this, it became, or it emerged as an advanced industrialized power. So Japan, following the Western country, the European country, it developed its education, its missionary, its army, its navy, and it came as a superpower. And it not only did this, but it also followed the way by which European countries did imperialistic work. So in imperialistic aggressions also, fights also, Japan followed the European countries. In 1894, this again is very important, children. In 1894, Japan, it went with a war with China, and in that war China was defeated, so Japan won, and the name of the war is Sino-Japanese War. It took place in the year 1894. So this war went for a year, from 1894 to 1895. So who went with the war? Japan went with a war with China. Japan won and China lost. So what happened when Japan won? It annexed, that means it attached the Liaotung Peninsula with Port Arthur. So it took away Liaotung Peninsula from China, and also it took away the port, which is called as Port Arthur. Now the great powers like Russia, Germany and France, they were watching this, and they put a pressure. They told Japan not to annex the Liaotung Peninsula and Port Arthur. And when too much of pressure was given by these great powers, what happened is Japan gave back only Port Arthur and kept back Liaotung Peninsula. So now Russia was seeing this. Now Russia thought, okay, let me also wage a war. So Russia sent an army, its army to Manchuria. Manchuria is a place in China now. So already Japan went with a war with China. Now Russia is also going with a war with China, that's Manchuria. Now what is Japan doing? Japan joined hands with England in 1902, and it asked Russia to draw back its force from China. But Russia did not listen to this, because Russia thought Japan was not a superpower, so it did not listen. So it waged a war against China, and it waged a war against Japan so that it can capture, China's Manchuria, that's that part of China. So that is called as the Russo-Japanese War. And who won in that Russo-Japanese War was Japan won. So when Japan won, what happened is it took back again Port Arthur. Already it surrendered Port Arthur. Now after having the second victory, what happened is it took away again back Port Arthur. So that's called as a Russo-Japanese War. Now Japan has become one of the great powers along with the European powers. So this is what we learn in this part where we see about the rise of Japan. So two wars are there. One is the Sino-Japanese War and the other one is the Russo-Japanese War. So next we move on to strong arm diplomacy of Japan. So here Japan was becoming more and more powerful. So diplomacy means it's tactfulness. Tactfulness means cunningness. So by political means they were becoming cunning. So after 1905, Japan took control of Korea. In what way it controlled Korea? In their domestic and foreign policy, Japan took control. So Japan's diplomat is a person who's working or who is a person who's got political influence, a very highly respectable person. We call them as a diplomat, Japan's person. So he was killed in 1910 and it was an excuse for Japan to annex Korea. Annex, again let me tell you, attach. So it took Korea to its side. Now, meanwhile in China, if you take, there was the Manchurian dynasty, there was a downfall. So what happened is there was a lot of confusion in China. So Japan took this as an opportunity to expand its empire. So Japan demanded a few things. Now remember, Japan is now the highest kind of power right now. So it demanded. One was, it said German rights in Shantung to be transferred to Japan. So German country, it had its rights over Shantung, a place, but it wanted that to give it to Japan. It wanted to hold Manchuria. Now it wanted to have a connection with Manchuria. And it also appointed Japanese advisors to Chinese government. So Japan advisors were given for which government? Chinese government. So this also happened. So that's what we see here. So if you look into your book, if you will be able to see that strong arm diplomacy of Japan. After 1905, Japan took control of Korean domestic and foreign policy. The assassination means killing, of a prominent means a very famous Japanese diplomat, provided the excuse in 1910 for Japan's annexation of Korea. The confusion in China following the downfall of the Manchu dynasty in 1912. So in China there was a dynasty, an empire that fell in 1912, which is called as the Manchu dynasty, provided Japan an opportunity for further expansion. Japan now demanded not only the transfer of German rights in Shantung to Japan, so that was the first demand, and the recognition of Japanese hold over Manchuria. So it wanted to hold also Manchuria, but it also wanted the appointment of Japanese advisors to the Chinese government. This strong armed diplomacy aroused, that means it made forth both China, hostility of both China and the European powers. So both of them were like China and the European powers were like looking at Japan and seeing, they were astonished. Okay, that was the result. And now we move on to colonization and its fallout. So what happened when countries were colonizing the other countries? That's what we are going to learn in this part. In 1876, only 10% of Africa was under the European rule. But what happened is in 1900, so this was in 1876, only 10% was colonized. Whereas in 1900, the whole of Africa was almost colonized. So Britain, France and Belgium, they divided Africa among themselves, major part of Africa among themselves, leaving few for Germany and Italy. So, a few areas of Africa was left under Germany and Italy. Britain, France, Russia and Germany also established spheres of influence in China. Now we talk about, first one was about Africa. So in Africa what happened? Three main powers were there. One was Britain, France and Belgium. Now in China, who are the main powers? Britain, France, Russia and Germany. All of them were influencing China. Japan, what was Japan doing? It took over Korea. That's what we studied. It took over Korea and Taiwan. So Japan state was that. France, what was France doing? It conquered, it captured Indochina. Whereas what was the US doing? It took the Philippines from Spain, and Britain and Russia agreed to partition. Partition means split Iran. So they planned to split Iran. Some parts will go to Britain and some parts will go to Russia. European battle which was fought with Africa, it was a bloody battle because lot of blood, lot of people died. So it's called as a bloody battle. French long war. French, they had a long, that's France, French means France. They had a long war with Algeria and Senegal and they captured it. So it was not a short war, it was a long war. The France had a long war with Algeria and Senegal and they captured. The British, British means the Britain country lost to the Zulus. So here Britain lost with Zulus in 1879 and to the Sudanese army in 1884. So Britain along, it lost with some of that countries. The Italian army also suffered a devastating defeat. It was a very bad defeat. With whom? With the Ethiopian army at Adaus in 1896. So this was an overall view of what happened to the colonization and all those structures that we have read. So with this we come to the end of part 2 video. So go through this with your book content and the short form of what we have prepared so far. Try to understand the concepts so that we can go into the causes and what was the outcome of the war in the next video. Thank you.